We've also done another secondary analysis. I don't have a figure of it right here, but what we've been doing has been looking in particular at a subgroup of people who have severe and persistent mental illness. So we're talking schizophrenia, schizoaffective, or bipolar disorder primarily, but who also meet criteria for antisocial personality disorder. It's not a large number of people, but in our experience, it's around 20 to 25% of people with a severe mental illness. And we know that antisocial personality disorder, it's not talked about very much, and we know that it has a precursor, by definition, of conduct disorder in childhood. But there is evidence that people who develop schizophrenia are in fact more likely to have that as a developmental precursor of the development of schizophrenia. And we also know that antisocial personality is a very strong predictor in the general population, and turns out as well for people with psychiatric disorders, of the development of substance use disorders. So we do have a secondary analysis from this study that has looked at the outcomes of people who meet the full criteria for antisocial personality disorder, and this is then in addition to their co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorder, and compared them with the people who don't meet the criteria for that, and evaluated what the effects of ACT are. And actually what we have found is that there is an interaction with antisocial personality, and what we see is that ACT is more effective than standard case management for delivering integrated treatment for co-occurring disorders in two particular outcomes. One in terms of alcohol use problems over the course of the program, and the second one was in jail days. So the take-home message, just in terms of, and this is ongoing research and the like, but to me the take-home message in terms of ACT and substance use disorders is that, first of all, not everybody with a co-occurring disorder needs to receive integrated treatment on an ACT team. Some people do, but not everybody. Second of all, people with a history of frequent hospitalizations and a co-occurring disorder can benefit from receiving ACT services, and that is likely to decrease the rate of rehospitalization. Third, there may be a subgroup of individuals with antisocial lifestyles and a pattern of antisocial behavior going back to childhood who really benefit from that improved monitoring. It's a subgroup of people, but it's also a subgroup of people who cause a lot of challenges in terms of their behavior. They're more likely to be involved in the criminal justice system. They're also more likely to have offenses that involve aggression and violence. There is some evidence that subgroup of people with co-occurring disorders may benefit from the more intensive services associated with ACT. And so, for at least partly for that reason, at a minimum, many ACT teams focus on having some expertise, some person who specializes in the treatment of co-occurring disorders. And then that role, often more than one person, can be to help educate and to improve the skills of everybody on the team in terms of working with that population. Let's talk about some other enhancements. One enhancement that has become fairly routine, and interestingly, as ACT evolves and as other evidence-based practices evolve, the definition of what is good ACT service changes as well. So nowadays, there are many ACT teams that are defined, part of the composition of the team is defined partly in terms of including a person who's an employment specialist and who focuses on helping people achieve and get work, following the principles of supported employment as originally described in the individual placement and support model. We simply call this supported employment these days and then refer to the fidelity criteria that are used in the SAMHSA toolkits. But supported employment essentially being an approach in which the goal is to help people get competitive jobs, paying competitive wages, that are not set-aside jobs and that are owned by the consumers themselves. That's at least the standing definition of competitive work that's most often used. There's zero exclusion criteria, so consumers who want to work can participate in the supported employment program. There's no pre-vocational training component, so the job search begins early on after getting together with an employment specialist, identifying job interests and so on. Consumer preferences are tremendously important in terms of the nature of the supports. Not everybody has to disclose and the types of jobs that are sought. If you can match people to their preferences, you tend to get longer job tenures. People stay on jobs that they like more than on jobs that they don't like. And the job is defined as a full-time vocational job. In other words, and this is one of the potential tensions with ACT, but as with experience with other case management teams, the feeling is that if you don't have the employment specialist focus only on work, it's very easy for that person's attention and priorities to shift to other areas of functioning, case management, housing, and things like that. And work is the kind of outcome that always gets put on the back burner. As you know, I mean, I can remember back in working in the 70s or in particular in the 1980s, people talking about, a client might be at a day treatment program and they would go get a job, and they'd be, accused of allowing their job to interfere with their rehabilitation. So I realize that we've come a ways since then, but work still tends to get put on the back burner, and that's why part of the definition is to have an exclusive focus on work. So what the research is beginning to show is that when you include a person who is an employment specialist and is following basic principles of supported employment on an ACT team, by George, you improve vocational outcomes. So, and this is really kind of the lesson of the day, which is that ACT teams are effective at what they do, and if they incorporate principles of evidence-based practices into what they do, they can improve a wide range of different outcomes. But the provision of services in the community in and of itself won't magically improve outcomes, aside from the monitoring of the illness and things like that, which are often thought to be core functions. So then the question becomes, okay, how do we further enhance the ability of ACT teams to do these other kinds of services? Another potential area, which I have not seen systematic work in, but would be the incorporation of family psychoeducation as a specialization area within ACT teams. I think that the supported employment example of how you develop competency in targeting a particular outcome is more the exception than the rule when it comes to ACT teams. Aside from supported employment, most of the other areas of rehabilitation for which we have strong evidence are effective. Areas such as family psychoeducation, social skills training, teaching people how to manage their illness, and so on. These are all areas of rehabilitation in which we could seek to develop expertise within specific ACT team members, while they could continue to serve as ACT team members and provide the wide range of services that, in fact, ACT team members do. So I think having specialization while at the same time serving some of the generalist roles is, in fact, an attainable goal of ACT teams, and probably a necessary one. We're getting to the point where the amount of technology, how much we know how to do from a rehabilitation perspective, has grown so much that nobody can be the master of all of them. And yet, you really want to be able to provide the range of possible services on ACT teams. And so, to me, the solution is to invest in developing expertise in particular ACT team members, and a particular member may have expertise in one or two specialty areas while continuing to serve as in generalist roles. And so one potential area would be family psychoeducation. A somewhat different example would be, and there's work underway, but would be the use of ACT teams in order to either play a role in the diversion of people from criminal justice settings or from incarceration specifically, or the management of people who have come out of jails, people who are on probation or on parole or something like that. And there have been the development of models of ACT, sometimes described as FACT for forensic assertive community treatment teams. But so far the data is very mixed in terms of careful controlled trials of these interventions. What they have, enough research has been done to know that if you simply get somebody coming out of jail and you give on, and they may be on probation or something like that, and you give them ACT level services, that will not in and of itself prevent them from going back into jail. I mean, there's good controlled research showing that. And there's a number of hypotheses as to why this might be the case, but I think that one of the possible reasons is that traditional attempts to use ACT to stem involvement in the criminal justice system have been provided mainly by people in the mental health field, serving the client, often in some degree of coordination with people from the criminal justice system, but where you don't really have the criminal justice system at the table functioning in any way as members of the team. And what you have is a natural tension between different professional duties of mental health providers and people in the criminal justice system.